Well, now, in the selection of Normandy as opposed to the Pas-de-Calais area where the crossing was much shorter and so forth, was the surprise element of Normandy the principal factor in making that decision, or were there other factors?
Well, yes, that was one. Although, strangely enough, Hitler, with all his intuition, did have one good guess. But he never thought it was good enough that he would order the main defense to be made in Normandy.
Whole beach had been, Rommel had just sown it with obstacles, every kind of miserable, vicious obstacle, and most of them were mine. Therefore, if you'd have tried to come in here with these ships, we'd just all been blown up. For example, there were 4 batteries of field artillery in here, and there were 85 machine gun nests, to say nothing of all of the concrete fortifications, some of which still remain. There were 8 big bunkers, each of which had a 75 gun or more with a local support.
Wider and wider grew the scene. The beachhead grew in depth and width. From the beaches, spearheads struck out and pressed inland, through the villages towards Caen, Isigny and Carentan, and Montebourg and Saint-Mère-Église in the north towards Cherbourg, fighting over open country and in the streets, destroying the German conquerors of France, capturing their supply dumps and taking prisoners. Airborne units fought an engagement here close to the gliders in which they had landed.
This is the Norman countryside behind the beaches. These hedgerows were an unexpected hazard, and General Eisenhower told a story of GI ingenuity.
This attack in this hedgerow country was terrific, because here, let's say this field would be 50 yards square. You'd try to take men and sneak along the hedges to get behind the defenders of the next hedge. Well, on either side, they'd be flanked by the riflemen. So you just had your tanks to get in there with these light guns, couldn't knock them out, and they could give you the firepower and the infantry could get on, and that's the way we finally broke through.
So, you know, one of the biggest problems correspondents had in Normandy during the battle was explaining how a hedgerow could stop a 30 or 35-ton tank, because people at home thought of a hedge as the kind of hedge they have, but not like this.
Just stop here a minute, Walter, and I'll just show you how this thing worked. Here's the hedgerow, and it's not really a hedge, it's a bank of earth. And frequently this is 4 feet thick, 5 feet thick, and often 4 feet tall. And the hedge grows right out of that thing. So that your tank, it can go through the hedge all right, but when it does, it bellies up, you see, and its guns are pointing straight into the sky. And so the fellow's anti-tank guns can just go right through that soft underside of the tank and just put you out of action. Now the problem had bothered us for some weeks, and finally a little sergeant in an ordnance department, his name was Cullen, and he had an idea. All it was in the world was to take a tank and with welding a bar on there, they welded then little plows, you might call them, snouts. Actually, we found the steel for it down on the beaches where the Germans had made these beach obstacles down there. We took that steel, welded little plows, you might call it. They just cut off this bank as you went into it. And this kept your tank right square level, guns blazing when the next hedgerow, which was only 50 yards away. And on top of that, you really carried some of your own camouflage with you as you went through the thing. This idea very quickly got into the very top echelons, to General Bradley, to be specific. He took a look at this man's homemade model, and he just went ecstatic, proving that the Army brass is not always just Colonel Blimps. Now, this was before we made our breakout on July 25th and captured Saint-Lô. And but I think for the assault battalions, at least, we had 2 out of every 3 tanks had these things on. And this thing was really a godsend to us. And by the way, Sergeant Cullen later lost a leg in the war and was invalided home.
Why didn't our intelligence tell us about this hedgerow problem so we could prepare in advance for it?
Well, because no one had ever before really had tried to attack through these hedgerows, and no one had thought of it. And remember this, we didn't expect to make a blitz down through these things anyway. On the left of the whole line, we expected that the British Army would be down in the high ground below, or the open ground behind Falaise. This would make it easier for us to get down to St. Lo, and it was only then we were going to start our wheel to the Seine, to the left, you see. Well, actually, what happened, because of the tremendous defense the Germans put in around Caen, we finally had to start from way back at St. Lo and swing from there. But then that swinging around movement with just a whole effort to capture the German 7th Army sprung up from the fact that they didn't want to give up that line, so they began to attack right into our hinge. And that gave us a big opportunity, and Bradley, I think, probably thought of the idea first and said, let's swing in closer and capture these fellows right here.
By the middle of August, more than 10,000 Germans had been killed and 50,000 more captured. These prisoners seem relieved that their war is over. For many, it was their one chance to get out of the war without being labeled a deserter. These prisoners, and thousands more like them, were eventually shipped to POW camps in England and the United States, where they had the best of a bad war. They would return home alive and well-fed. As each town was freed, the French came out to greet their liberators. And as the summer wore on, there were more and more of the liberators on French soil, heading inexorably toward Paris. It appeared the question was not if Paris would be liberated, but who would get there first, the English, Americans, or French. The Germans did not retreat without a fight, exacting a heavy toll for every mile won by the Allies. More than 240,000 German troops were able to escape back across the Seine. They blew up the bridges behind them, slowing the Allies slightly, until engineers could put up temporary bridges to keep the flow of troops moving forward. Finally, Paris was in sight. The German commander, realizing the fight for France had been lost, ignored Hitler's orders to raise the city. The French flowed into the streets to welcome their liberators. Men, women, children, all deliriously happy that their nightmare under Nazi rule had finally come to an end. No one could contain their emotions, especially American GIs just happy to be alive. Some Nazi snipers, unaware of the German surrender, took potshots at the celebrating crowds. German POWs were driven around the city to quell the snipers. Some were sent off with a less than friendly pat on the head. On August 25, 1944, the French army was officially given the honor of marching into Paris first, with Charles de Gaulle leading the way. Parisians went wild. For them, the war was over. But for the Allies, there were still many miles between Paris and Berlin.